Hello, and welcome back to the ATA's Politics live stream. I am your host, John Humphreys. This guy, I don't know what side he's on where you guys, by the time you watch this, but this is Brian Marlowe. We're both from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. They're who put food on our table so that we can come and speak to you. Brian, how you doing?
Yeah, good. I'm having one of those nights where I had to get the daughter down to sleep and felt like going for a nap myself. But
yeah. I know the feeling. Now, before we actually even get into the normal introductory stuff that I'll normally do, we just have to address the elephant in the room. What has happened to your face?
Oh, I got in a fight with my razor when I was trying to trim my beard and just completely screwed it up and just went zoom down like that. And I thought to myself, do I salvage this and just go with some mutton chops or something like that, or a mustache or something, or do I just shave it all off? And I thought, oh, well, I'll just start again. But it's fine. My beard grows like crazy, so probably in a month or so it'll be back. But
I think for a lot of people, this is going to be
I just look like Peter Griffin.
I was going to say, for a lot of people, this is going to be the first time they get to finally see what you actually look like.
Oh, mate. Sorry, I'm just really tired. For the first time, I don't think I've been beardless in 5 years more.
Oh, it's a pending divorce incoming. It's let's say, by the way, if you're watching at home, if you want Brian to grow back his beard, give this a like, give this a share, go and like us on social media, or he will threaten to make you look at this face for longer before the beard comes back.
The benefit of the beard is it hides most of the face, which means you only have to see a little bit of this. So I only offend you slightly, and that's just not good.
You look so much wiser with the beard. But anyway, by way of normal introduction, we're live stream, so you see every mistake we make live. We can't get away from it. Simulcast, YouTube, Facebook, and X on the Australian Taxpayers Alliance channels and my own. If you don't yet follow them, please go and follow them. It helps us do what we do. And as I said, we're with the ATA, taxpayers.org.au. Go and check it out. And if you feel so inclined, please become a member. But shorter version of the intro, so I can not delay things too much longer. So a few things on the agenda, including like trying to clean up some of the stuff we're trying to talk about last time when we had internet troubles.
That was insane. Like your internet dropped out, mine dropped out in like a minute afterwards, and then I don't know. It was the Rothschilds. They didn't want
I gotta say
tax reform.
The positive thing about that is after you disappeared, then apparently I had bad internet, and then I just disappeared. I was playing around, and I eventually got back in. I thought the whole thing would have dropped, but it didn't drop. We just had like a minute or two of blank screen and dead air, and some people stuck around. So I felt then obliged to have to I couldn't give up on the live stream. Then I had to just keep going, because if people are going to sit through 2 minutes of nothing, can't do nothing. So it's we'll get through a bit of that, and I want to do a bit of a deep dive into something that I touched on. I mentioned last episode, but then I didn't dive into the details. I said I would come back to it, so I'm going to come back to it now, and that is looking at basically the absurd incentives that come out of our tax and welfare system at some of its most extreme. There are 6 points where if you earn, say, $1,000, you have to give the government say 2,000 or 2,500 or some ridiculous situations where if you earn more money, you are punished. Not just punished as in you don't get to keep all your money, but you are actively made poorer for the crime of working harder. There are 6 places like that in the Australian tax and welfare system.
Some sort of like low-level weaponized autistic graph to show people.
Oh, of course. You'll enjoy it.
It's not a tax stream without a graph.
Oh, and it's not even a well put together graph. I mean, it's there for purposes of showing the point. It doesn't have the fancy bells and whistles. We haven't got a graphic designer to come in and make it look good. The problem with getting a graphic designer to fix my graphs is they always change what they say. And I end up just spazzing out and being too autistic about it and just say, no, screw it. Just put up the bad graph. I don't want it to say what I'm not saying. So,
I remember we gave it was literally just the Excel data. And it was like, just use this to form a graph and then make that graph pretty. And somehow they came back with a graph that told like the opposite story.
It happens so often. It's just, but anyway, we will get into that. But before we do that, a politics roundup. What's happening in the world? See, I do all the boffiny, pointy-headed stuff, but Brian has a much closer finger on the pulse of what's happening in politics. He walks the corridors. He gets insider goss, and then he can't tell us where it comes from, and it's all very frustrating. But Brian, what's happening in the world of retail politics?
What's happening in the world of sort of federal retail politics? I think the coalition's campaign has hit a brick wall. I think that No, I don't think they've made many mistakes or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that. I think that, um, how do I explain this? All of their momentum was building up off the back of the fact that they weren't Albo, and that the Labor government was screwing everything up. And the Labor government's still screwing everything up. But you then get to a point where voters start asking themselves, okay, great, you're not the current government. We don't like the current government. What are you going to offer us? And so far, there hasn't been a huge amount that sort of goes back to what I personally think voters are looking for. There's been some stuff in the culture war space about, we're only going to stand in front of the Australian flag, and there's been some stuff about government efficiency. And to Dutton's credit, he is signaling that he wants to, deport, dual citizens if they break certain egregious laws and things like that. Commit certain egregious crimes. But outside of that, I just get the sense that there hasn't been a huge amount of feedback from voters around being keen for any key policies that the coalition's put out there. Now, maybe once budget week hits, the coalition will roll their policies out. When you're in opposition, you want to roll your policies out after the federal government's dropped their budget, and the reason for that is that it prevents the treasurer at the time, so Jim Chalmers in this instance, it prevents them from costing your policy claims or your.
You mean after they've called the election, right? So that's
correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. Once they go into caretaker mode, you can then announce all of your policies and you can show what you think it'll cost. And it prevents the government at the time from costing your policies and saying, no, it's going to cost squillions because we did all this research. And usually it's dodgy research to make your policies look bad and their policies look good. So I understand that. But my concern is if they don't drop some really hardcore policies and put them out there for voters to pick up on, they're not going to keep that momentum up. And then we're going to face, minority coalition government, minority Labor government. Either way, I think is just as bad as the other. I don't want a minority coalition government. I want either a majority with a mandate on key metrics, or I'd rather them lose.
Yeah, I can understand. We did talk before, though, even if they get a majority government, they're not passing anything through the Senate. So the talk about what the Liberals would like to do is just most of it. I mean, there might be some things they can convince the Greens on, but most of it is just talk about what they would hypothetically do, and then they just get in and get thwarted by the Greens in the Senate the whole time.
Although,
I think.
So I agree, and even if they form majority government, because of what might happen to the Senate, where you just get a hostile left-wing Senate, they probably won't be able to pass a bunch of stuff. That being said, though, I always want things to be directionally moving directionally the way that I want it, right? So even if it's one step towards the right, and then there's a million blockades in the way, that to me is still better than, a minority coalition government that just doesn't even get anything done in the lower house.
Oh yeah, this isn't an argument for a Labor government. It's an argument to put people's expectations in check about what's actually going to end up getting done. I mean, it would be better to have an electorate that is shifting away from Albanese's policies than not be shifting away. We've got some comment coming in here. Labor spending so much cash. Why would people vote against that? Yeah, well, that's. I mean, to be fair, the Liberals are spending pretty much just as much. I think they're just promising to do the same. I mean, you make the point. I think it's a fair analysis of the Libs. They put out the nuclear policy, their one big policy, and then their strategies just seem to be able to say, oh, besides that, we'll do everything Labor will do, but we'll do it in a Liberal way. So just minimize the differentiation and hope that everyone hated Elbow.
And I've been telling anyone who listens to me that they need to actually start announcing some pretty aggressive tax cuts for families that we spoke about in the last podcast and the one before that. It's not just about tax cuts. There needs to be migration cuts and things like that. There needs to be a raft of other issues that sort of fit squarely within the right-wing space. But a lot of those policies are pro-family, and they actually help families out, and they help the people in the electorates that they are looking likely to pick up. So they need to do more of that. And right now, the last sort of since the Trump election, right, that there was the vibe shift. Then there was this sense that the coalition were just a shoo-in and they were going to get it. All the bookie markets, all the betting markets seemed to show that. Everyone you talk to seems to think that, but the problem with that is it breeds complacency and it breeds ambivalence.
Well, I think
And
yeah, I mean, my read of it is that most commentators were still saying the most likely outcome is a Labor minority government because there was a big enough swing on, but it was in the wrong seats, and so they thought even all the Teals they thought would be re-elected. That could be in question now. The
yeah,
Teals
but the
would then
problem is,
back Labor.
but the problem is when you talk to some of the campaigners and when you talk to some of the other groups that are trying to, push in the right direction, they all pay attention to the betting markets because they just think that whatever.
No, I agree. I mean, you and I had the same opinion. You and I think, had the same opinion that a lot of these people did, which is that a lot of these online TV commentators might have missed a bigger switch that was in play, one that may be stalling now and end up making those commentators correct. But yeah, a lot of the insight. The other thing is, if they can, within one term, get even close to government, like Abbott did in 2010, they'll probably consider that a pretty big victory, given they can't control the Senate anyway. If they can just get close, they'll say, well, that's close enough to, secure Dutton's leadership. We can sit around. They'll have a horrible government for the next 3 years. They will look even worse for the next 3 years. And then we can slide in 2 terms. So they're probably just trying to minimize risks, which is that risk-averse nature of the bureaucrat, the boffin, and the hack is a blight on our politics, and it takes away their ability to even consider good policy.
The risk-averse nature means that if you get in via a risk-averse campaign, you then are elected with no mandate, which means you then are not able to actually achieve anything because the people in your own party that hate you and think that they'd be a better leader don't want you to get a win. So when you then say, okay, well, we just scraped through and now I'm going to pass this, family tax cuts or whatever it's going to be, all of a sudden you'll have people in different factions within the party that don't like you that say, no, we didn't get elected on that. We got elected to, give handouts to transferees at yacht clubs. And nothing gets done. So, yeah, maybe this is why I don't work in major party campaigning. I'm one of those psychos that says you either win and you win with a mandate or you fucking lose and you come back again. Anything in between, minority governments or anything like that is a waste of time. Yeah, maybe it'll be a repeat of the Abbott years, but if that's the case, Dutton needs to set the expectation within his party. Right, so there's a lot of talk about we can win this and we can fucking be the turf out a first term government for the first time in however many decades actually. That's all fine, but if you don't achieve that outcome and you don't set expectations within your own party, well, you're setting yourself up for a leadership spill once you lose. So,
well, that's why they call you Brian the Trump Marlowe because. Break through or just break, or crash through or crash, something like that.
Yeah, just like either win or lose. That's
well, I don't think that's terrible advice anymore. I think this has been your instinct for a while. I suspect. I think it's fair to say. I think the current attitude of the boffins and these risk-averse hacks has been roughly correct for Australia. Unfortunately, I don't want it to be, but it has been up until this potential vibe shift. And look, if the vibe shift is not on, they may still be correct. I hope they're not. But there is a vibe shift happening eventually. And when it eventually hits these shores, and maybe the Liberals could hurry up and help it hit these shores by having some guts, when it does hit the shores, this pussyfooting around isn't the right approach anymore. Then it actually becomes bad politics as well as bad policy, right? So it becomes a double negative, and then hopefully we can get someone with gumption and guts, like a Farage, like a Le Pen, like a Trump, doesn't have to believe in their policies, like that, but so who could change things up.
I guess the only other thing that I wanted to add to it as well is that, I see a lot of hatred from the online right sort of lumped solely at the feet of like Dutton or at the feet of, one other, a couple of other people in the party. And I get it, right? Like they're not, the view is that they're not shifting the dial enough to win the election. And I broadly agree with that. But the problem is that a lot of the times these guys are hampered by the hacks and the bureaucrats and the stuffy Karens that are around them. And that's not to apologize or try and, make up for their inability to push these people out of the way. I think that they should push them out of the way. But you need to get a better understanding of sort of the political reality of these major parties in Australia. They're not at that sort of popular stage that we're seeing in other countries. And I obviously want them to get there. And I'm trying to say, look, you actually need to fucking build a mandate, and you need to whip your dick out and say, look, these are the things that we believe in. These are the things that we're going to deliver if you elect us. And if you don't win the election, well, shit, the Australian public didn't want that, right? Like you don't build a mandate by saying elect us because the other guy kind of sucks, and maybe things will be different, but maybe not. It's just it won't work, right? I know what some of these guys believe personally. I know that they are quite based at a personal level. Show the fucking public.
Well, the other problem with that is it's not just that the bureaucrats and the staffers that they've got to deal with their own sort of internal sort of devils on their soldier telling them to calm down. Half the party is mod, right? I mean, half the party is dripping wet. Half the party doesn't actually believe in any significant reform or actually taking the country in a different direction. And you've got to maintain the leadership of your internal party. And then one of the issues there is there's so few people that are now members of political parties. And this is not a pitch to join the LNP, but if you're not a member of any party and you refuse to join any other, at least join them. I mean, we need good people to just join a party so they can sit in the background and vote for the less bad options. But if they've got so few people in there and it's mostly just the friends of the hacks, then those hacks are able to have disproportionate influence.
You can't. I mean, I say safe space because most conservatives are leftists, which means that they understand leftist terms. So I say safe space, and I think that it's up to us as proper conservatives and proper, sort of dissident right types to create that safe space on policy issues to drag the few remaining good people over to our side. John obviously uses the term Overton window. But yeah, most conservatives are leftists, so we may as well use a leftist term to try and explain to them what we're talking about.
The problem with that is even if you shift the Overton window, that only helps if there's secret good guys in the Liberal Party. And then you shift the Overton window and then they can follow you because they want to. But if the Liberal Party doesn't even want to follow us, like I'm constantly frustrated. I think it is so self-evident that they need to gut the bureaucracy, especially the bureaucracy's leadership, who are all just dead set hostile to any serious reform agenda, in any way reform that we would like the word. So if they don't gut that bureaucracy, they cannot make progress. But I think the honest truth is that half the LNP, the MPs and leadership, agree with those left-wing bureaucrats.
Oh no,
it's not like a guts.
I'm not suggesting that the majority of the party is made up of base people. I'm saying there's only a few there, but they are temporarily.
Well, here's my pitch then to the people listening here. If you want to do something about it, you're not doing anything else. Of course, you join a minor party as well. It's a great idea. That's what plenty of us have done in the past. But if you're not doing anything else, then at least join a major party.
Stack out some branches.
Or just sit in the background and do nothing but vote the right way when you get a chance. And it just makes it that 1% more likely something good might ever happen. But anyway, enough of encouraging people to do politics. Powell's other glasses suggests they dump Dutton for Hastie. I suspect that'll have all the same problems we currently have, just with a slightly better orator. But I can't see where that's... Can you mention nuclear before? People are giving us the chance to pitch in on that. What is your take on the coalition's nuclear policy?
It frustrates me to some extent because it plays into the idea that we need to really give a shit about climate change. Whereas really, like, if this is about cheap energy, just fucking reopen coal power stations and gas, right? Like, the only reason we have coal power stations that are falling apart and running and being shut down is because we have told these companies that we're going to destroy them in a few years' time. So why would they invest in their businesses and keep them going? They will just let them fall apart and then shut them down when they need to. If we got rid of that and then said, look, you can reopen, and if the left-wing government gets in, they'll have to pay you a compensation if they want to shut you down, then you can just do that. But this nuclear sort of solution it's kind of like, it's like trying to appease inner city, Karen caucus teal voters by saying, like, well, no, we care about climate as well. Don't worry that China and India are completely, annihilating.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you on that, because I don't think that's who they're appealing to. I think they're appealing to the wet liberals. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
If the
wet liberals are the Karen caucus.
Yeah, but they're not trying to appeal to anyone outside the Liberal Party. This is the nuclear option, I think, was the only way to keep the Liberal Party from imploding and having half of the party constantly publicly attacking the other half of the party. If the ABC didn't exist, and every left-wing journalist didn't exist, I think they'd still do this. Because
I agree with you. When I'm talking about the Karen caucus, I'm talking about half the Liberal Party and half the sort of base within that party. I'm not opposed to nuclear. I think we should fucking have all forms of energy, right? Well, no, we should have forms of energy that work. So that means the wind and solar can get fucked. But we should have with that caveat, all forms of energy. I'm not a libertarian purist, so I just accept the political reality, which is that the government is going to get involved in rolling out, massive power projects. I get that. But yeah, the thing that frustrates me about the entire nuclear debate is it implicitly agrees that Australia, which emits 4/5 of F all, needs to somehow come to the global table when it comes to global emissions. Meanwhile, China, India, America, and a whole bunch of other countries pump out whatever they want. And I think they should pump out whatever they want, because cheap energy means that your economies boom, and it means that your people live healthy, happy lives. So, like, yeah,
I'm going to.
Sure, open the nuclear plants. I'm all for it to some extent. I just wish we didn't have to couch it in this fucking leftist rhetoric. But
it is picking up on a few things there. It's an insidious argument that the left has perfected, and they've done it really quite well, and it's working. That they've basically forced a situation where no one invests in coal, and when no one invests in coal, they turn around and point to that and say, "Look, no one invests in coal, and because of that, the infrastructure is getting old. So now we have to change." You did that. You did that on purpose, and then you point to it as proof that you were right.
They do it. I'm a former mechanic, right? So like, just love cars, but they do it with electric vehicles as well. They create tax incentives to make electric vehicles cheaper. They don't apply the same tax incentives to internal combustion engines. In fact, they put all kinds of restrictions on internal combustion engines to limit certain emissions. A lot of the restrictions they place actually make the situation worse. EGRs on diesels and DPFs actually make those vehicles less reliable and push up manufacturing costs, which then make those vehicles more expensive compared to an electric vehicle. And then they turn around and they say, oh, well, more and more people are buying EVs. And that's a sign that the free market is making the decision that they want gay Teslas. No, people are buying EVs because they're cheaper and you're incentivizing them and you're giving tax subsidies. And then you're also putting all kinds of regulatory burdens on traditional vehicles that make them more expensive and less reliable. But
by the way, isn't Tesla supposed to be based now that Trump's selling Tesla from the White House now? So, Tesla's now based.
I'm probably going to piss off some viewers. Trump is a leftist as well. I like him.
Well,
I like he's a good leftist. I appreciate a lot of what he does, but most of what he does is through a left-wing perspective.
So two other quick comments on what you were saying there. One is in terms of the impact we have on the global temperatures. I've always thought it would be just a good administrative transparency measure, because who's against transparency measures? That every time you have a climate policy, just somewhere in the climate policy, you have to say, this is our estimate for how much our climate policy will change the temperature in 100 years. Because we all know the answer will be 0.000, no, based on like IPCC, based on UN climate models. The answer will be 0.000000001. And then we can look at that and go, oh, yeah, that's worth us doubling our electricity prices.
That's worth national economic suicide.
And then we can just compare the benefits and the costs and look at those two. I mean, you don't even have to have a commentary on it. You just say, just be transparent. That's a rule now. Every policy, be transparent. Tell us the expected temperature change. I reckon that would work wonders. And on your comment before about the you're not a libertarian on this, and I understand, this gives us a bit of creative tension in here. But the libertarian answer, I think you hinted at it before, is regulatory compensation, which is if you pass a regulatory compensation mechanism in the country, then in the future, if a future government comes in and screws up a legitimate business with their overregulation, they then have to compensate the business for the impact of that regulations had on the value of that business.
It disincentivizes future governments doing that, right? So
yeah, and if they do it, at least the people
business, and he has to invest $5 billion to do so. My government allows that, but let's say left-wing government comes in and wants to shut John's business down. Well, they have to pay him out $5 billion plus whatever his projected earnings would be over the life cycle of the business.
Well, it doesn't just do that. I mean, it does do that, and that makes it just much fairer. They have to pay us out, and therefore they're less likely to pass stupid regulations unless they can really show publicly that the regulation is so good it's worth the massive cost. But the other thing it does is it increases people's willingness to make that investment in coal and gas powered electricity in the first place, because they know that this big cost, of this political risk premium, we call it in the jargon, the political risk premium, the effective increase in your costs coming from the threat of a future commie government shutting down your business, that stops a lot of investment. If you take away that risk, slightly more people will invest. So.
And people might think that this is theoretical. I've spoken to a couple of people from nuclear energy companies. They don't even want government investment. They are saying that they can fund the entire build themselves. They don't even want it to be a state, joint run enterprise. They just want the approval to open up a site, and they want that compensation mechanism worked in. So they're like, no, we'll put up the $5 billion or whatever it's going to be to build the sites. We can get that privately funded. We just want a mechanism in place so that if there's a change in government, they screw us over, we get our money back.
Yeah, and this regulatory compensation isn't a crazy idea. Indeed, a very similar concept was the basis for that Australian movie, The Castle. I mean, the idea that if the government takes your shit, they have to pay for it. Well, there's a thing called regulatory takings, where they pass regulation which devalues the value of your stuff, which is basically the government taking away your stuff in another form. And so compensating for that just only seems fair and improves policy. That's another. Maybe we should do a session on that sometime. But that's going in a bit of a different direction. Do you have any other hot takes
there was something
about
I
what's
wanted to
happening
say.
in the world of politics?
There was something I wanted to say, and I completely blanked on it. Mustn't have been that important.
What about outside of this issue, then the decline of the Liberals' fortune and their unwillingness to do anything? Firstly, are there any hints? Have you heard any rumors in the back alleys?
Yeah, I don't think that they're not willing. I think that there's a fair few discussions that they need to start announcing some really hardcore policies. And I'm forever the optimist, so I think that they will. So we'll see. But this is the thing I wanted to say is we're focused solely on sort of two-party politics, because the reality of the situation is that that's who forms government in this country. Now, let's say the most realistic scenario plays out: coalition get in, minority government, and are ineffective, or even they form a slim majority and are ineffective because they got elected without a mandate. And sure, they announce some really good policies to win the election, but that they don't actually enact them. I actually still, maybe it's a sort of schizo viewpoint of it, I view that as a good thing, because then it will crystallize to a lot of people that the major party options are no longer good enough, and then you actually need a proper resurgent right. So you've seen that in the UK, right? They had 14 years of a Tory government that for 14 years promised all kinds of things and then did the exact opposite. And then they completely crumbled. Yes, they've got a Labor left-wing government, but by 2029, you might have a Farage-led reform government. So in the grand scheme of things, I think that's a net positive for the UK. I think that would be a net positive here in Australia. If the coalition government doesn't come to the table and actually push proper, centre-right policies, and actually try and turn this country around, well, they're just tying a noose for themselves in 3 years' time, in which case there's an opportunity there.
Well, I think that is the most likely way it plays out if they get elected. Look, the big upside of them getting elected still is we can stop all of the inane bullshit that Albanese Greens government would do over the coming 3 years. I mean, that's the real big upside. Even if the coalition can't get anything done on a policy front, hopefully they could at least stop some of the biggest craziness. But yes, when they inevitably disappoint, we talked about this, I think, on our very first one of these live streams, that's if they get in and then disappoint, that's going to be the moment that voters might have to look around and go, wait, what else is there? Speaking of which, segues nicely into, I want to get your hot take on this. I'm not sure if you've seen it. Clive Palmer, of course, everyone's favorite minor party politician.
Before you segue, can we talk about Trumpet of Patriots? Because if people think that that's what the alternative is, it's not fucking Trumpet of Patriots, because they're fucking retarded.
Well, I was going to actually bring up their policy suggestion that's come up again now.
Their policy suggestions are retarded.
Interest rates. Well, I mean, some of them are last election, to be fair, they basically just ripped off the policy manifesto of the Libertarian Party for most of their policies. And those ones were, well, I think were fine. Of course, I think they were fine. I had a lot to do with writing the baton. One of the big exceptions to that is the one they've brought back now, which is to cap interest rates at 3%. Now, I don't know if you've seen that. They've brought that one back. Ralph Babette, to his credit, has never talked about that again since he got elected. But have you seen that one floating around? Or
yeah, I saw it earlier today. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry.
Is that going to work with normies who don't really understand money and just sort of get tuned out with the details?
It will work with disaffected right-wing voters who are frustrated by the two-party system and they're looking for something and they are struggling to buy a house so this is the problem. Is it sounds good, won't work. It will make the situation even worse. It'll drive up housing costs. I'm talking against my own self-interest here. I own a house. I want housing prices to go down because it's better for the country. Now, yeah, okay, that means that I've probably played myself in the sort of mortgage game, but it's just a bad policy, and it's like the lowest of the low populist policy as well. Like,
Well, I slightly disagree. I'm not sure it's going to put up house prices. So,
well, you run through
it
it.
Depends how
you're the boss, and I'm just the sort of shoot from the hip guy.
It depends how they do it, which they haven't really clarified. And there's a number of ways they could try to do it. But if all they're saying is they're going to introduce a rule saying, hey, banks, you can't charge more than 3% interest on a home loan.
Which is
then the consequence of that is the banks are not going to give home loans. No one will be able to buy a house and the property market will crash. So maybe that's the goal. I don't know if that's their secret goal. I don't know if they thought this one through. I suspect they're actually planning on doing something more similar to introducing a government bank or something like that, and have everyone be able to get these 3% interest loans from the post office.
Can we also just talk about the reality of this, which is that the Trumpeter Patriots are not going to form government. They're most likely not even going to get a single lower house person up. So they're talking about all these government policies. I've seen other parties do it too. They're like, oh, if we're elected, we're going to fucking, I don't know, make cars free. Well, sorry, like we do work within a two-party system, and I agree that maybe there's a need for a reform type movement here, but that's a long play that takes multiple years, and you have to build them up, and there's a unique set of opportunities that you need in order to do that, in that you need feckless leaders of major parties, and then a strong person that people trust to create that alternative. And I just, this Trumpeter Patriot stuff it's just not going to happen. The entire purpose of Trumpeter Patriots is to hoover up some of that disaffected right, give preferences to the coalition in key seats, and help them win the election. And that's fine. It'll probably succeed. I'm all for that. But they're not going to form government. And by doing this, and we spoke about this a couple of podcasts ago, they will most likely fracture the disaffected right vote or the minor right vote in the Senate, which means that you'll only get leftists in the Senate. So then you'll have,
the Malcolm Roberts situation in Queensland,
lower house, or you'll have this base Dutton government in the lower house that can't pass a single fucking law because you have a left-wing Senate.
Yeah, just quickly to respond on the economic point, and Brian, you're absolutely right. It's weird how they talk about how this Sue Ellen lady's going to be prime minister, and they've announced who's going to be their attorney general and their foreign minister. But I mean, put aside that weirdness for a second on this actual policy, because you do the politics, I'll do the boffin. The idea of reselling them onto Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, even that wouldn't make any sense because they can only sell them at the present value of the expected future income streams from the repayments, and that's going to be lower than what it costs for our banks to borrow money. And also Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are American. But I mean, but if we had the equivalent here, even that wouldn't work. It wouldn't incentivize them. If they're borrowing for 4% and they have to lend at 3%, saying the word no saves them 1% of their money. So they got to say the word no. It's
look, this housing thing, like it's a very simple thing. You either increase supply or you reduce demand, right? To increase supply at a political through a political lens, and through the political reality of this, involves multiple tiers of government becoming extremely efficient at firing out houses and going through that process. So you need a federal government that's going to remove whatever their sort of federal regulations are that limit development. You need state and local councils to do the same. But then you also need to balance that with the fact that a lot of people don't want to live in cities and suburbs that have been turned into just monotonous dog boxes. Or you can reduce supply. Or you can reduce demand. And one of the ways to reduce demand is to not have 3 million people come into the country over like a 2-year period. And that can be solved by one minister signing one piece of paper. So all this crap about a random party that's not going to form government and probably won't even get into the Senate putting up, policies about how they're going to turn the country around. First of all, it's stupid because they're not going to form government. And second of all, the policies don't even tackle the one or two issues that would actually fix the housing affordability issue. Now, obviously, I think it's quite clear where I sit on the solution, but It just doesn't
Look,
make
I
sense.
agree. We should cut immigration if for no other reason than it'll destroy our entire university sector and we can get rid of
Yes.
all those annoying academics trying to tell us what to do, and for other reasons as well. Wind back on immigration. We can debate the details of that another time on an immigration section. But in terms of the supply side, because that's going to be part of it too, realistically, people keep moving to the city. Our population will trickle up for a while yet to come. You're right. It's a difficult thing to coordinate. But it's the federal government just has nothing to do with it, right? Everyone blames them, so they try and do something. The problem is that the local and state governments, you say it's a complicated solution. That's not going to show up, is it?
Abolish local councils. Well,
3 words. That will fix the problem.
This is getting into the weeds a little bit. There are certain federal things that then get adopted by state and local councils. So, like the federal government will pass some like EPA requirement around something, right, to protect the fucking scared nose wombat from habitat, destruction. Local and then state and local governments will then adopt those policies and then take a much more extreme view to then shut down any sort of form of development. So there are little things that can be tinkered with at a federal level, but yeah, most of it is at a state and local government issue, and we're in a federal election. So the only solution that a federal government has where they can turn the tap on and turn it off is to turn around to turn around to one of your ministers and say, sign this piece of paper that says we don't have open borders anymore.
There's another way to look. I think it's mostly to do with local councils, because the other governments are sitting there pulling their hair out, getting blamed for it, and then their local councils have an incentive to be NIMBYs. They always do, and so. But anyway, that's or change local councils to states. I love that idea. I'm not sure that'll happen.
I mean, I understand frustration with NIMBYism, but I also have a lot of concerns about YIMBYism.
I think also that, let me clarify one distinction here. There's one idea that you always just need to build up and increase density everywhere. Look, that's one option. Maybe that's the right in some instances. I'm not sure, but it's not obvious to me that that's
the fucking apartment building. Then, like,
different people are different. Different people want different things. So maybe it's good for some, but that's not what I'm primarily talking about. I'm talking about making it easier to build like outside of cities.
Yeah,
like I'm all for, and this is an unpopular opinion, I'm all for suburban sprawl. Go on a suburb somewhere outside the city, maybe with a fast train that Clive could build for us, and sort of build a community in that suburb and be able to build that house. So anyway, my solution on local councils and turning them basically into body corporates, we could do another whole session on that because it takes half an hour to explain it. But it's but yeah, I'm not saying it's necessarily build up. Maybe it's build out, but still building out is being restricted by our local councils now as well. So it's anyway, that's a bit of a
and building out also somehow results in dog boxes as well, because they're allowing developers to break down lots into like 200 square meter blocks and then putting like a refrigerator with doors on there and calling it a house. This is my boomer moment coming through. I don't like it. It's not good.
I don't like it.
An Australian.
I think there was someone else that said that. I don't like it. So just quickly on this ongoing economic debate I'm having live with the with the screen below me with AusNotes. Look, that's their government bond rates. That's if the government's borrowing money. I agree the government could borrow money cheap enough to give out 3% loans, but that's why I said perhaps what Clive is talking about is having a government bank. If he is, I can see how a government bank can do 3% loans. That's easy to see. But if he's just capping private banks, then at the current cash rate from the RBA, that's not workable. So yes, he could then cut the cash rate, but then we all know what that's going to do. It's just going to spike inflation. So, but anyway, we're probably getting too boffiny, but at least AusNotes knows what I was talking about there. So I had other things I wanted to cover. We've dived into this quite a bit. Did you have anything else on it, or?
No. I mean, we could go around in circles all night, right? But
we both agree on the cutting immigration is one option, and I think we both agree get everyone out of the cities. As soon as we said that last time, your regional internet stopped working, so perhaps we shouldn't say it again, just in case.
It's a global conspiracy, mate. Anyone who's like, oh, we should have pro-family policies, and maybe we should, not have a revolving door border. It's all of a sudden there's protests in Hungary and in Serbia, and our internet gets shut down. It's
that's Romania. That Romanian situation is crazy too.
That's insane. That's just like, no, you're not. No, we're a democracy. You're not allowed to get elected. What?
Yeah, I was over in Brussels a couple of months ago for the Make Europe Great Again conference, and I ran into a bunch of Romanians from the European Parliament over there. So I got to have a bit of a I went to one of their protests.
Did you explain to them that the problem was is that Romania and Europe respects democracy, and unfortunately, Romanians voted the wrong way.
Yes, well, I mean, it was quite remarkable to hear the story there and just find out recently the guy that won and then they cancelled the election because he won, then got arrested last week.
Nice.
So
Why?
he's
What for?
threatening to win an election that the EU didn't want him to win. I don't think they put it in those terms, but
Yeah, I'm sure he committed some hate speech, or he's like a Russian collusion person or something. It's all this. It's always the same. It's always the same crap, right?
yeah. So anyway, the EU is broken. They should shut down the EU as well. But that's a whole other topic. That's a topic for another day. So I wanted to get into a bit of an economic rant. We're 40 minutes in, and I need to keep you awake so that you can normie check me as we're doing this. I don't know if that's a word, normie check.
Yeah, sorry. Show the graphs. Apologies.
So I've talked before several times about the EMTRs, acronym, jargon, the effective marginal tax rates. So EMTRs for short, I'll say that for the rest of it, which is basically saying, I mentioned it before, for you do some overtime, you earn $1,000, how much of that $1,000 ends up with the government? That's the EMTR, right? So it's kind of like the most simple version is it's your tax. Yeah, taxes are part of your EMTR, right? Say your tax is 30%. You earn, let's say you earn $100. Make the maths easier as I'm on the fly, right? So you earn $100, you pay 30 to the government. You keep 70, right? Everyone kind of understands that part of the story. But your effective marginal tax rates actually get a lot messier than that because it's not just the tax rate. There's the clawback of other benefits and the clawback of welfare. And so it can create really tangled messes. So I put together a graph. I was going to say a messy graph, a simple graph. I don't know what to call it. I'll just call it a graph. And we'll chuck it up here and I'll talk it through. And I'm talking this for you. So you're my audience here, Brian. I'm looking at your facial expression to see if anything I'm saying makes sense or doesn't. And the people at home can just throw bricks at both of us. So people who listened to last Thursday, I did put this one up. I did put this graph up last Thursday when I was talking through part of this, but I never got to the funkiest part of the graph, right? So just to
this is how your marginal tax rate should work, right?
Well, this is what they say it does. So the x-axis, the line across the bottom here, is your income. So if this is in thousands, so that's 1,000, 6,000, 11,000.
Yeah, you pay nothing until you get to, what, 21,000?
18,200 is what it officially says, which is bullshit, but that's what they officially say. And then it says you pay 16% up to 45,000. And then it says you pay 30% up to 135,000. And then you pay, 37% up to 190,000, and then you pay 45%. That's the top rate, and it goes on forever. I just stopped the graph at 250 because graphs have to stop eventually.
That's how it's meant.
So I was going to say I have to read your face to find out what's going on. It might be hard if that comment's true, but
it's true.
All right, I can see everyone's taking this graph very seriously. Thanks a lot, fellas. Thanks a lot. Anyway, so that's what it's supposed to look like. And look, you can make the case that taxes should be lower. They definitely should. Tax-free threshold should be higher. I made that case. That was the rant I gave after Brian.
Be a horizontal line that starts
at 0%.
Just the entire.
But you can make all those cases.
Can we just send that to the coalition, which is like, here's your current tax system. Here's what we're offering.
And here's just a blank graph, and this is what we're offering. We should do that as the last one, right? That'll be the last one we send through to them. But look, anyway, the point is it should be lower. Tax-free threshold should be higher. The numbers should be lower. Some people say it should be flat. Fine. I agree with all that. But relatively speaking, this is what a tax rate looks like, right? I mean, this would be normal. If what they're telling us is true was true, we'd look at that and go, oh, yeah, fair enough. Kind of boring. I expected that. But of course,
when you explain this to normies, they kind of get it. They go, "Oh yeah, no, when I hit a certain threshold, it goes up for that portion." Yep, makes sense. Yep.
All right. Of course, then just looking at the tax side, that's not quite accurate. I did get this far yesterday, but just taking you through with me, Brian. Just looking at the tax side, that's actually what we've got. So you can see it's still at this end, it all looks kind of similar. It's all just 2% higher because of the Medicare levy, which, as I said last time, Medicare levy is just an income tax with a funky name to trick people into thinking it's a good thing, right? It's just an income tax. It has nothing to do with Medicare. So we have two income taxes. This one, there's a 45% one and a 2% one, and the honest situation is a 45 plus 2. But instead of us just adding them together and being honest, we just tell everyone it's 45, and then down in a footnote it says PS plus 2. So, I mean, it drives me batty that we can't just be honest with our tax system. But that's one of the things here. The other thing we have in here is the low income tax offset, which is how you get some of this funky stuff. By the way, this little bump here is the fact that those people earning between about $25,000 and $30,000, they pay a marginal Medicare levy of not 2%, 10%. Has anyone ever
So
told
hang
you that?
on.
I mean,
So up until the tax-free threshold, sorry, once I just passed the tax-free threshold, I'm paying what?
that it's 16% once you hit, and then it jumps straight up to 26 when you start when you hit the Medicare levy free threshold, and then you start paying the Medicare levy at 10%.
At 10%
Yes,
between the incomes of how much?
about 25 and 30. I mean, it's indexed, so the numbers are rounded, so
So
it'd be like
so basically, so
25,461.
to use leftist talking points, the big end of town who's on, 100 and something $1,000, they're paying the 2% levy, right? But a part-time worker who's putting themselves through uni and making $29,000 a year, working at a cafe or working in retail, they're paying 10% Medicare levy.
Marginal,
So this
right?
is
So the important thing, it's marginal.
sure.
So that's not talking about the total.
But this would be a good example of a regressive tax, right?
Well, yes. Anytime this line goes down, that's regressive. That's what that means, right?
Yep.
Progressive tax means this line should always be going up. A flat tax would mean it's straight. A regressive tax is here, which is where the some people are paying a 10%. Like your example, you're on 29,000. You put in some overtime, you earn an extra 1,000. 100 of that 1,000 goes to the government to Medicare levy, like 10% of that extra 1,000 you earned. And then when you get a bit richer, you go back to just paying 2% marginal. Then it goes up a bit, and then you've got another little regressive point here. This is because the low income tax offset is a benefit that makes your tax-free threshold look bigger. So it's actually like 22,500. So that's nice. But then they claw it back. And when they claw it back,
Right.
It's exactly the same thing as just a higher tax rate on other people. But no one sees it because that's not how they report it. It's one of my bugbears. And I know it seems so boffiny and nerdy, but I'll get to this in another session where I've got a whole policy idea just on the idea of transparency, which sends people to sleep. But by the same token, it also means the Liberals should be able to do it then. If all you're doing is increasing transparency. But I think if you increase transparency on what this graph looks like, that itself would just set the groundwork to be able to fix parts of it. But wait a second. People saw it last week. This isn't where it stops. This is just the first two funky elements. So let me take you to the next part of this. The next part of this is factoring in welfare. But I'm starting with just an individual person. So this is what that looks like.
Sorry, can you go back to what the tax graph's meant to look like just by itself, and then go to?
Oh, that's on there. That's this bottom one here.
Okay, yeah, you're right. So
I've left it on there. That's what they tell us. That's reality.
Just for the 7 viewers at home, the orange,
400.
the orange graph is what our marginal tax system is meant to look like, and then the blue line is sort of the evil reality of it.
Yeah, the effective marginal tax rates, the actual incentives you face in reality for a single person if you factor in the welfare system. So you see, of course, if you're at the higher levels of income, factoring in the welfare system doesn't make much difference, right? Because you're not getting welfare, so you're not losing much welfare. The one exception, you'll see the blue line is slightly higher. Firstly, that's factoring in. Oh no, that's just factoring in the Medicare levy. So don't worry. It is just the loss of welfare over here. There's something else that we get to on the next graph. But this is mostly the fact that when you earn money through the welfare system, you start losing welfare at 60%. All right, so you lose welfare at 60%, plus you pay tax. And my pitch here isn't that you shouldn't lose welfare. Obviously, you have to lose your welfare as you get more money. It makes no sense. You don't give Clive Palmer the welfare. You have to take the welfare away as you get richer. But why on God's great earth are we also getting the same people to pay tax while they are receiving and losing welfare at the same time? It means they're doing this tax welfare churn that's entirely pointless. You've heard me rant about it before. And it means they're getting double hit in their effective marginal tax rates. They lose welfare to some degree. Fair enough. You have to. Maybe you could lose it slightly slower, but that's a different debate. You have to lose your welfare. But you don't have to have people on $20,000, 20,000 income per year paying tax when they're also receiving welfare. That person is still receiving welfare.
Yeah.
So why are they paying tax? So this was my pitch for that Thursday one about we need to increase that tax-free threshold significantly. It makes no sense to have all this churn where you've got the taxpayers.
So where should kick in, like $40,000 or something?
Well, I pitched for 50,000. So the way I would do that is you take the orange line here.
Yep.
This 16% tax rate. I said just get rid of that. Bring that whole thing down to zero.
Yep. So it's nothing until you're earning 50 grand.
That would be nothing till 45, and then I'd bring that 45 up to 50. So and then index it so that it stayed, and that would have it being above the annual minimum wage. Now, minimum wage is a whole other conversation. Let's not get there, but it does exist as a concept. And this would put our tax-free threshold above the minimum wage. And it would stop a huge amount of tax welfare churn, which is absolutely pointless. And it would bring down these EMTRs, right? The EMTRs would still be at 50 or 60%, depending on what the withdrawal rate is. But at least it wouldn't be at 70%.
So why do they? And why does this why does it exist like this? I know that's probably such a midweek question, but I guess what I'm trying to ask is there some weird sort of smoke and mirrors stuff that goes on here where they've figured out that it brings back. I guess what I'm saying is is there some smoke and mirrors play here that they've figured out, or are they just fucking retarded?
Oh, there's elements of both. I mean, firstly, just the political element of this. Why would anyone have an incentive to show this graph? So no one knows, right? Just so few people know what's going on. But secondly, also the policy I suggested before, pushing out that tax-free threshold to getting rid of that 16% bracket. It wouldn't be cheap. I mean, if they did it in one hit, it would blow a big hole in the budget. So my suggestion was do it slowly, right? Just legislate for it now. Say it is our policy now. We commit to getting rid of the 16% tax bracket, and we will do it with a small tax cut every year until it's gone, just bringing that rate down. So you could do it 1% a year, you could do it 2% a year, whatever it's going to be. Firstly, I think that you'd get a political win out of saying an aspirational goal to stop taxing poor people. Oh, stop that, you stupid program. But anyway, you get a political win out of saying...
The political message is don't go too hard and too fast. We'll just go slow.
You know what I want them to do, but the whole pitch here was inside the Overton window.
That's what I used to say to chicks when I was dating them.
Have another drink. No, look, you know what I would do on this, but I'm trying to do this as what could we sell? Like there's jittery government and they can only afford a couple of $1 billion in tax cuts. What could we sell to them that's not going to have them all crying? So I'm trying to pitch this within the realms of the Overton window. I think this one would, as I ranted it in at length after you were gone last time around, I think this is within the Overton window, because if you do it slowly, it only costs somewhere between $2 to $5 billion a year, depending how you did it. And if you could stand up and say, our aspiration is to get rid of the lowest tax bracket so that no poor person has to pay income tax ever again, that is an aspirational goal with a plan to get there, I think is a political winner. How would the left argue against it? And you're getting rid of this tax welfare churn. You're getting rid of these high EMTRs. It makes sense on productivity. It makes sense for the pointy hats. It makes sense for the political world. And if you did it slowly enough, you can afford it. So
why do you think why do you think they don't touch it? Because I remember you when I went to Parliament and in between some meetings on some stuff, we spoke to some people specifically about this, and their eyes glazed over. Like, it was very clear. It was like, look, you can, create massive tax cuts for people entering the workforce. You will completely neuter the left-wing argument that the coalition only cares about the rich, and you're actually, putting through, proper, meaningful tax reform.
Well, one of the reasons is that they just want to have this bracket creep so they can save up the bracket creep to spend on unsustainable programs they're too gutless to reform and to hand out. Yeah, and this would basically, what I suggested would just be unwinding the bracket creep. I mean, this is how unradical this suggestion is. I think with a great political payoff, and all it does is hand us back less than the bracket creep each year. But one of the reasons is they want to save up that money to pay for unsustainable programs they're too gutless to reform, and to hand out trinkets in other forms, often in a spending form, because they think they get a better bang for their political buck by throwing our money out rather than letting us keep more of our money. And I think a bunch of them just don't understand this. I mean, and that's not really that's not a slight at the politicians. I mean, you know this better than I do. Politicians actually work quite hard. They're often decent blokes and Sheilas, and they're working quite hard to try and get across what they can. They've got so much to get across because the government is so bloody big and always doing something, and they've got to spend at least half their time just trying to get reelected, and as they should in a democracy. But I mean, that means their focus is on how to be a nice person, how to, shake hands and kiss babies, or shake babies and kiss hands. And they're very good at that. They're not necessarily going to have a lot of spare time in the day to sit down and try to understand effective marginal tax rates. And so a lot of it just goes over the head and just gets passed on to the boffins, and they let the bureaucrats do it. And the bureaucrats run rings around most staffers, because staffers are 22-year-old hacks who are just waiting to, work their way up the young liberal pecking order so they can get pre-selected someday. And it's the whole incentive structure there is screwy. So there's lots of good people here who are just letting this go by because they just don't know. Because why would you? 400 people are sticking with us now, but everyone else besides those 400 people aren't willing to stay up until 9:30 p.m. on a Monday learning about effective marginal tax rates. But as crazy as this is, by the way, we haven't even started getting crazy. But first thing on this, do you see that spike?
Yes.
So that the effective marginal tax rate's there. I had to write it in because the graph stops at 100%, but it goes up to 624%. So at that point, if you earn, what is that point? I think it's at 36,000. Is that roughly 36,000? It's hard to tell in this graph. Yeah, at about 36,000, if you earn $1,000, you offered some overtime. You go, yeah, sweet, I'll take some overtime. You earn $1,000, you have to give 6,240 to the government as a penalty for the crime of working that overtime.
Just rewind 10 seconds and give me that spiel again, because that just doesn't make sense. Like, sorry, like
it doesn't. The whole thing doesn't. Anytime this graph has anything touching 100%, it just doesn't make sense. But I mean, this is not just touching the graph. 624. You know how big that graph would have to be for you to be able to see it in scale? It goes up 6 times this. So that's 624%. You earn $100, you keep nothing, and you give $624 to the government. So I've shifted into hundreds now. I don't know if that makes it easier. But if you earn $100, for the crime of earning $100, you have to give $624 to the government. Now, most of that is in lost welfare, right? I mean, that's because a big part of that is you get some welfare cut off at that point. Because the big part of this is your rent assistance, right? If you're getting rent assistance, you're on welfare, you're losing your welfare at 60%, right? Which is less than 100%. 60% is still very high, but it's less than 100%. So you still get to keep some of your money you earn, right? But then when you lose the last dollar of welfare, you then lose about $6,000 a year worth of rent assistance, gone in one hit, right? It's not tapered. They don't take it away slowly. They just say, oh, yesterday you used to get $6,000 rent assistance. Today you earned $1 more. I'm sorry, that dollar puts you over the line. You get 0 rent assistance today. That's actually the system. It's an insane system that everyone would reform if they understood it. But
they don't understand it. Yeah, okay.
So anyway, as crazy as this is, let me show you the actual effective marginal tax rates for a family. Now, obviously, I have to make some assumptions about the family because there's lots of different families. So this is a family of 2 parents with 2 kids, with one person being the primary income earner. All right. And we're looking at the income of that primary income earner. You ready for this one, Brian? You'll quite enjoy this.
Yeah, go.
Oh, okay.
I hate everything.
It's glorious, isn't it? I mean, it's almost artistic. I mean, it looks like I've just been trying to be as random as I can be. But no, I don't have the ability to be that random. I'm too autistic. So it's, but that's beautiful. Brings a tear to your eye.
I had someone who's watching the stream message and say, why should my apprentice kid have to worry about doing a tax return?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. So you take the tax-free threshold up to 50,000 and then everyone can just laugh it off.
All right. So you already broke my brain explaining the 624% tax increase.
Now we have 6 of them.
There's now a 680% tax increase. So that's a 200.
Well, I can run through
2%.
Yeah, so that one's off the graph on the income because I only showed income up to 250,000 because I thought beyond that we're getting hard to empathize with people earning more than that. But if you earn 366,000 and you commit the crime of earning an extra $1,000, then you lose 276%. So you earn 1,000, you give back 2,760, which again doesn't make much sense. That's about the childcare subsidy. You lose the childcare subsidy supplement effectively just in one hit. All of these ones, nearly all of them, are caused by instances where there's a benefit you get that's not tapered. Tapered means they take it away slowly, like your welfare, right? Welfare is taken away at 60%. We sort of discussed that before. That's why you have this big, high effective marginal tax rates on poor people that most people aren't fully aware of. But that's because you're taking away welfare at 60% in the dollar. You earn $100, you lose $60 in welfare. And you pay another roughly $10 in tax on top of that. So people kind of understand that to some degree, but there are several instances in our welfare system. We've already described one. That's the rent assistance, where you just lose it all in one hit. If you earn an extra $1, sorry, it's all gone. So we've got 6 instances here for this family. I can just run through them quickly. At $36,000, the worker loses their energy supplement, which is a small thing, but it puts them up to 100%. So, if you're offered that overtime, don't take it. The bigger ones by far are up here. Firstly, just look how high these effective marginal tax rates stay for so long. I mean, this isn't a one-off thing. This situation here is caused by the fact that if you're in this partnered situation, your partner is losing their welfare at $60. They lose $60 every time you earn 100. Your partner does that,
Right.
but you're paying the full marginal tax rates, which gets way too boffiny. I don't know if anyone wants to sit down later. We'll do a private session for anyone who really wants to do a deep dive on how they get to that. But that's over 90% effective marginal tax rates for a very long income there. Where's that? Just eyeballing that 40 up to 64, roughly speaking. So all of those people, that family just has no incentive to work. If you are a family earning $40,000 with one primary earner with earning $40,000, you're just screwed. Income has to jump straight to like 110 for it to make any sense to work. And then we get to, and some people get to, blaming the bloody lazy people who won't take a job. Blame the politicians that are screwing up the incentives. That makes no sense for people to put in any overtime, work any harder, get another job. I mean, these families are just getting massacred in this rate. So why would you? 100% tax rate there. It goes down to only 83%. Only 83% tax rates, people. And then up to over 90, and then up to 165, which is just silly. So that one is about you start losing your family tax benefit, family tax benefit at 20%. Plus you lose your health cards twice. Those health cards are, they're worth quite a bit. I didn't know this because I never had a health card before, but if you look into it, they're quite a nice little welfare perk. You lose the welfare energy supplement for your partner. You lose 60% of your welfare, plus you're paying 30% in tax, plus you're paying 2% Medicare levy, plus you're paying 1.5% in paying back your LITO, the low income tax offset that you have to pay back. So that is what, as I count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways you're losing welfare between $64,000 and $68,000. Don't work. I mean, this is nuts.
That's the message for the entire podcast tonight. Don't work.
Don't work. Oh no! Or I mean, and this is the sickening thing about this. Or get divorced.
I am politically engaged, and I also care about tax policy. But even I look at this, and I don't doubt your modeling. It seems so insane to me that there's that part of your brain that just goes, "Oh, it can't exist." Like, it's like Eskimos. It's really
not even controversial stuff. It's just people. There are boffins who talk about it. You can find papers on this. It's talked about, semi-regularly. Boffins talking to boffins, and everyone yawns.
No, I'm sure it is. But like, it's the same as Eskimos. Like, I'm sure they exist. I've been told about them. I've never seen it.
No. Let's not go too far now. I mean, 600% tax rates. Yes, Eskimos. Come on, let's not get too carried away. This is,
but this is just like, anyway. Jokes aside, this is madness. Like,
now, then look at this. Though you get to 68,000, and alhamdulillah, the government has decided you only have to pay 50-something% tax now. So I mean, sweet. Your tax rates have plummeted to 50%. Now, if we normally talked about 50%, we would be grumpy. But this is your 30% normal tax rates, plus your 2% Medicare levy, plus you're losing family tax benefit at 20%. So 30 plus 20 plus 2, 52%. Although very soon after here, that jumps up a little bit because you start losing your childcare subsidy, because that also is means tested. But before that, it has to spike back up to 232%. And what's that one for? 232%? No, 235, right? 235%. That's when you lose your family tax benefit supplement, which very few people know about. So it is mind-numbing. You know how long you have to spend going through all of these rules? Of course they're able to hide it. I think they hide it on purpose. This stuff is so complex and not linked together in any way and not clearly explained in one clear place. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should just have a website on our on the taxpayers.org.au, one place where everyone can see them all put together, because they're not put together anywhere by the government.
No, I think we should. I'm also going to ask the midwit question again, which is, with this particular, tax reality, is there some, Marxist progressive boffin who's articulated an argument that somehow this is a good thing, or is this again just like crap policy that's just kind of just been slapped together over the years, trying to patch random things to build up votes, and then it's just created this absolute mess?
Yeah, the second one primarily. I mean, this one is the family tax benefit supplement, is to make sure that there aren't too many poor people who accidentally take out too much family tax benefit during the year, and they're left with a big bill at the end. So then they just come up with this idea, well, why don't we just, when that, if they screwed up during the year and they, at the end of the year, they do a reconciliation and said, oh, sorry, you took too much family tax benefit, you have to give some back. why don't we just make it so that we just give a big handout to poor people at the end of the year, and we'll make that handout as big as most people make a mistake. And that way, even if they made a mistake, they won't have to pay us back, because if they have to pay us back, they won't vote for us again. And then what they did is they said, well, this supplement, this little extra bonus you get at the end of the financial year, we don't want it to give it to everyone. All right, well, we'll only give it to people up to 80,000. If you earn 80,000, you get the full supplement. If you earn 80,001, sorry, you don't get any of the supplement. And that's the way they wanted to introduce it. They didn't want everyone to get it, and that was the cheapest way to do it, I guess, in their mind. And it does save on money, right? Because if you tapered it out, then people on 90,000 would get some. They'd get a lesser amount, but they'd get some. And so if you tapered it out, you'd either have to taper it out earlier, so people on 80,000 wouldn't get the full amount, or people on 90,000 would still get some, and it would cost you more. And they're saying, well, how can we do this as cheap as possible, but still avoid this political problem of people having to repay overpaid FTB? And so that's, I mean, I'm not in the minds of the people putting the policy in place. I'm just sort of interpreting it as logically as I can. I suspect that was what was in their minds. But for whatever reason, this is what we got. Anyway, that one goes back down, jumps back up again as you start losing. Yes, they're only charging 55% tax, effective marginal tax rates now. So, you know, go and get your job then.
In the context of this, 55% marginal tax is good.
Yeah, well, eventually we get down to only 50, which is what the rich people pay. But I mean, anyway, before we get there, it spikes. Yes, I know. This is a very regressive graph. You'll notice that there's lots of instances of the line moving downwards, right? So but anyway, then it spikes up to a gobsmacking 680%. So if you earn 100, you give the government 680, or if you earn 1,000, you give the government 6,800. Which sounds bizarre. I know, it's like you were saying, it's hard to believe, but I mean, that one is because this is for the couples. So we talked about rent assistance for a single person. This is where the couples lose their rent assistance.
Right.
But they lose their rent assistance at the same time that they're starting to lose their childcare subsidy. At the same time, they got the 30% tax, and they've also got the 2% Medicare levy.
What income level? 100 and...
This one is at 105. So do not earn, if you're at 105, stop what you're doing.
Right.
Go home.
So if the both of you have, like, you know, a sort of mid-level job in a call center,
no, you can't. This situation specifically for a family where one person earns most of the income. I could do the other one if you want, so but it'll look like a slightly different graph.
Right. So your missus is at home raising the kids. You're making $105,000, and then your boss says, "Hey, mate, we're going to give you a bonus because you've been working real hard, and you're going to be on, you know, 110." Don't do it.
You'd be
Don't
poor.
take it.
You'd be poor.
You will be.
You would have to.
Poorer.
They would have to give you, I think, about at least 115 for you to break even.
Right.
I know this is why I look at this and I think, why isn't this a scandal? This should be a big issue, and this is fixable. So many of these things are fixable. So it is outrageous. It is fixable. There's an election going on. And it's you and me talking together with about 500 people watching now. So hello to those 500 people. I hope you're getting as outraged.
If any of you are on $105,000, if your boss offers you a raise, either ask for $120,000 or knock him out, because you're going to get screwed.
Well, I should say again, that's only for someone who's renting. So if you own your own house, then you don't get rent assistance, and then of course you don't lose rent assistance.
If you're a normal person in Sydney, right, $105,000 is now. This is what's even more insane. $100,000 in Sydney is like now the new $50,000, right? So if you're on $105,000 in Sydney, you got two young kids, and your wife's at home, you know, raising them, and you're renting because on $105,000 you can't afford to buy a house in Sydney. If your boss offers you a moderate raise because you've been working well, do not take it, because you will get annihilated.
Yeah, 680. I mean, the graph doesn't do it justice having that one little spike, but I mean, I didn't know. You can't make the graph go up to 680%. Otherwise, the whole graph just would look, the rest of it looks silly. So, but anyway, after that, if you can get through that moment, your tax rate plummets to only 35%. I mean, this is as low as it gets. Basically, after you earn your first $3,000, we don't really have a tax-free threshold of 18,000 or 22,000. Both of those are just part of the story to build up to find the actual truth. Your tax-free threshold in effective marginal tax rate terms is 3,000. So you can earn your first $3,000 before you start losing it. That's all the way down here. So you can earn that 3,000. After that, Your income never gets lower than this. The effective marginal tax rate never gets lower than this 35% that you get for a brief couple of moments, a brief few moments before it spikes back up to 610%. And this one, the 610% is where, and this is where it becomes relevant that one person is the primary income earner. This is where you lose FTB Part B. So family tax benefit Part B is a benefit you get if one of the people stays at home most of the time. And if you then earn $117,000 and you're offered $1,000 more, you lose all of it. You just lose that $5,000 or $6,000 or whatever it is, gone in one hit. So again, it's if you're on 117, if you're one person staying at home and you're on 115 and they offer you a raise to 120 or 125, you probably should say no. You're offered to do the extra work, but just ask them to pay you less and you might actually end up being better off than taking that raise. So you can see here from about the position of 105, I said before, you'd have to jump straight up to 115 before it'd be worthwhile. But if you did get someone to jump you straight up to 115, then you're still breaking even. Then you can earn about $2,000 paying 30% tax rates. And then you're screwed again. You have to jump straight up to 125.
Right. So
you have to go from 105 to 125.
So realistically, like, yeah, your middle management at a call center, I don't know. Yeah, your middle management at a corporate office in the city. You've got a wife and 2 kids at home. You can't afford to own a house because on that kind of money, you can't buy in a major city. So you're renting and your boss says, hey, mate, you've been working real hard. You've been putting in the hours, want to support you. You got 2 kids. We're going to jack you up from $105,000 to $110,000 and just, give you a $5,000 a year pay packet boost. You need to turn around and say, sorry, unless you're paying me $125,000 a year, I don't want to pay a rise. Because
also 125, going to 125 would still basically just be break even.
Right. So I want $130,000. Right. Yeah. Like that's madness.
What I've been screaming this for ages. I'm glad we got you on this live stream, and I forced you to have to pay attention because you're live on air, and you'd be embarrassed if you didn't pay attention. I've got audience capture here. This is what's been driving me crazy for so long. The answer down here, Osnote seems to be repeating your disbelief in this whole thing. We have put this to various degrees in front of. I actually presented at the Senate, where I put up a version of this graph. It wasn't as complete back then. I've done more deep dives, but it was basically a version of this graph. And I think it's on Hansard, where I described it as the graph is jumping up and down like a frog on meth. So I believe that was appreciated by some staffers when they saw it. But I mean, all the staffers remembered there is that I said frog on meth, and it was reported in Hansard. They didn't seem to internalize that these EMTRs are a dog's breakfast that actually could use reform.
The short answer, though, is yes, we have presented this to government officials on multiple occasions, and we're what, an hour and 12 minutes into this podcast. We've been spending probably 30 odd minutes talking about this, and we're just scratching the surface. And you need to spend a lot of time explaining this. And I hate to say it, most politicians are stupid.
And they don't have the time. I mean, even the ones that are quite bright. Yeah. And anyway, the last one, we've got through nearly all of them. We got through 5. The last one over here is where there's a childcare subsidy, which is withdrawn. Effectively amounts to, the withdrawal rate is different, and it's absurd. It's absurd for multiple reasons. But at least it tapers most of the time at about 2.7%, depending how many kids you have as well. But then if you've got 2 kids at daycare age, if you hit 366,000, you just lose this big chunk of money overnight. And then you've got this other 260. I mean, who cares about them, though? They're on 366,000. I mean, firstly, we should care about them. It is just stupid. We shouldn't have these welfare spikes. We shouldn't have these, what they call poverty traps. Sorry, these EMTR spikes, not welfare spikes. We shouldn't have these spikes at all. They're referred to as poverty traps in the jargon. And you can see why they're poverty traps at the lower end. These people's incentive to be earning money, I mean, it's just atrocious. These people here, maybe I should draw this graph, making this showing actually at what point it's worthwhile still taking a pay increase. The way you framed it, maybe we should actually, I'll run the numbers and find out exactly how big a pay increase you need before you should say yes.
We could probably do a video solely about that, like not a live stream, like maybe a 2 or 3 minute video where it's like, sort of like a day in the life video for someone who's out there, who's the average worker man, and what it looks like for them, and when they should or shouldn't accept a pay rise, because I think that will drive home to a lot of people just how absolutely screwed they're getting.
Actually, that'd be a good one. Yeah. Should you take your payrise.com?
Yeah.
People will just find that an absurd concept to start with, and then they'll plug in something and they'll realize, oh no, I should.
And it'll say, no, do not take a pay rise.
Or some people, you could say, look, you might want to take a pay cut. You might want to go to your boss and say, look, I'll still do all the same work. Could you please just pay me $3,000 less? I'll do all the same work, and you'll get richer. Yeah. There are people in that situation. It is, yeah. And the other
that'll
thing
be like our new Andrew Tate style get rich quick scheme. Like, ask for less money,
ask for a pay cut. Yeah.
Ask for a pay cut, and you'll get $3,000.
Yeah. So there's not only is this insane, but it's eminently fixable. A lot of these issues. I mean, the obvious thing to do. Firstly, some of these things should just be fundamentally reformed. I mean, we've already suggested changing the childcare subsidy, and the childcare subsidy should be changed. This isn't the only problem, by the way. This big. I don't know if it counts as a poverty trap for people on over 300,000, but this EMTR spike isn't the only problem with the childcare subsidy. The childcare subsidy actually gives you a bigger subsidy if you send your kids to a more expensive childcare. And of course, the more expensive childcares are likely to be closer to the inner city. So inner city people get a bigger childcare. You don't get a subsidy based. You don't get a subsidy based on how much you need it. You get a subsidy based on how expensive the childcare center is that you go to. There's more of that. There's two things done like that, and the incentives are insane. This is one of the reasons. Right? I wish I was. The incentives there are that you actually have. It's much easier for the childcare centers to put up their price, right? Because as they put up the price, the subsidy goes up.
You get more of a subsidy, so it's all like.
So it's totally warped incentive. So if you took that childcare subsidy and just gave it as like a childcare voucher, now I'd prefer to just give it cash in hand to parents, as we talked about. That was one of our first policy suggestions in that family tax mix. Just give the money, cash in hand as a refundable tax credit. So that's what I'd prefer. But even if you gave them a voucher so that they could then spend that voucher on a childcare center, which, again, not the way I do it, but even if you did that, that would be better. Because give them a fixed voucher and then you incentivize them to buy the cheaper childcare center. And you don't give a bigger subsidy to inner city people and a smaller subsidy to people living in rural areas. I mean, it's a remarkable system. I mean, it's clearly being done by the childcare industry and not by people who care about actually making the system make sense. And it's not the only one. Rent assistance. You don't get more rent assistance if you're poorer. You get more rent assistance if you're renting a more expensive house.
Right.
But if your goal is to help poor people, why would you do it that way?
Well, the answer is this is all middle class welfare, right? Okay.
Oh well, I mean,
is a lot of this sort of downstream from the Howard era kind of middle class welfare explosion, or? Well,
the family tax benefit stuff all flowed out of Howard, but this stuff isn't all. I mean, there's childcare subsidies came in more recently after Howard, and the rent assistance existed before Howard, as did the
Yeah, okay. So it's what we spoke about before. It's just successive governments kind of just, slapping stuff on and then just creating this absolute mess.
And realistically, that's my fear when we give the government a new idea. We give them an idea and they say, oh, look, we can't do the whole reform, but we'll just take one part of it and slap it onto whatever it already exists, because we can't tinker with anything that exists. Because if we tinker, someone will complain. Someone will complain. So we'll just take the current mess and add another piece of mess to it. But some of these are fixable. So with the rent assistance and the childcare subsidy, the way those work should be just entirely reformed. So rent assistance should just be rolled into your welfare payment, in my opinion. But even if it's not, make it a voucher and just taper it like we do everything else. Childcare subsidy, just get rid of this ridiculous thing at the end. Just taper it like you do with everything else. You can start the taper earlier if you're worried about the budget impact, or just give less childcare subsidy to rich people. Perhaps that's a good idea too. With some of these other ones. The health cards, again, that's a benefit that's just taken away in $1. Just remove all these things where you've got a welfare cliff, this EMTR spikes, just taper them all. I mean, it's not pretty. It's not what I'd do. I'd get rid of a lot of them. What I'd do is roll a bunch of them all into one payment, and your base payment, your welfare payment would look bigger now because you're rolling everything in. You roll in your rent assistance, you roll in your energy supplement, you roll in your health cards, and just put a value on it, roll it into one number, give that as your welfare payment. So your welfare payment will look bigger. Won't actually be bigger. It just will look bigger, and people apparently get tricked very easily. So why not? And then it'll be so much simpler, and just taper it. It just tapers down, and then it's gone.
Just to sort of go back into ancient history politically, but I remember 8 years ago we were pushing on a, welfare should only be for the poor kind of argument, which was what David Leinhart was saying, which is okay. If we're going to operate within the Overton window which is that welfare should exist, then it should only be for the poor, which means we shouldn't be giving childcare benefits to people on $350,000 or higher. And I remember getting annihilated with phone calls in the office from high income earners saying, well, I pay heaps in tax and the childcare benefit is a tax cut for me. Like that's the way.
Yeah, it's up to. So I guess it's up to 533,000. 533,000 is the when.
Bad economic policy, but good political. But it was a good political play by the Howard government because they framed it as a tax cut for people when actually what they should have done is give them an actual goddamn tax cut.
Yeah, an actual tax cut. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we're saying. We're saying, no, we support giving you an actual tax cut. We just don't think you should be able to take other people's money in the form of, childcare rebates when you're on $500,000.
Or to rehash some of our stuff from the family tax cuts. Instead of giving people money to look after their kids only if they look after their kids in one specific way, how about you just give them the tax cuts to allow them to look after their kids in whatever way they want? And if they choose to pay for childcare centres, the childcare centres will look more expensive now because they're not subsidised, but they'll have better competition because they won't have this ridiculous system where their subsidy is bigger if their prices are higher. So you'll have better competition. Because people will become more price sensitive to the childcare centres, which they won't enjoy being price sensitive. You don't like it. Oh, look at this price. I don't like that. But if the government's giving you $5,000 and the childcare centre is charging you $5,100, whereas the other situation is the government gives you nothing, but the childcare centre costs $100. Those are the same situations. It might feel bad to hand over $5,100, but because you don't want to hand that over, you're price sensitive. That actually creates the price competition and forces the childcare centres to be more competitive, and that will hold their prices down. You'll notice every time the subsidy goes up, their prices go up. Clearly, it's not a competitive industry where consumers are price sensitive. So we would add that price sensitivity and actually improve the childcare centres. Childcare centre prices would go down anyway, and you'd have the money to be able to choose if you wanted to use them or not. So that's harkening back now to 2 weeks ago. So that's ancient history, Brian. Ancient history. Speaking of which, you reckon there's any movement on the station on whether some Liberals might be nibbling around at our family tax cut policy?
What did I give? I said 20% last time. 20% chance they pick it up.
You're sticking on 20?
21, 22.
Oh, we should do this. We'll do this every episode. We'll do a rolling estimate, and we'll be able to. I'll graph that by the end of our session.
Yeah, I mean, I just I've got to manage. I have to manage expectations here, right? Like the problem with major party politics is you'll meet with people who have great conversations. They say this is a great idea. They run it up the chain, and then for whatever reason it dies, or it gets the policy gets butchered. I think that some people can see why this is important. I think that they can see not only why it is important economic policy, but it's actually a vote winner and potentially an election winner. And I don't care what the incentive is for them to take up the good policy. If they take up the good policy because I compliment their shoes, then that's fine, right? Like I don't care. I just want good policy to be changed, to be put in place. So,
well, to be fair, they are lovely shoes.
Yeah, I give it about 21, 22%. Last week I said 20%. So I'm slowly building confidence, but once bitten, twice shy. There's been numerous times where we've put proposals in front of multiple people and it's we felt like it's going to get somewhere and then it just doesn't. But my argument is that the coalition's campaign has lost its momentum, not through any fault of their own, just through the fact that Australian voters are now sitting back going, okay, well, we agree, Albo sucks, Labor sucks. What are you going to do? Because there's some decent polling data out there. I should have put it together so I could run through it on this stream, but there's some decent polling data out there in some of the key seats where people agree that we're going in the wrong direction, but they're not convinced that voting for the coalition will set them in the right direction. So they're not actually necessarily shifting votes. Exactly. that's exactly right. They're kind of just sitting there going, oh, well, okay, hang on, my dog is sitting here having a dream. One sec.
Well, you can join.
Mate, Archer, buddy.
It's okay. It humanizes you, Brian, because sometimes we doubt your humanity. But if you have a dog, you must be a human, right?
Come here. Yeah, so they're sitting there going, okay, well, we're, sure, we might be going in the wrong direction with the current government. We're not sure that we are, that voting for coalition will send us on the right path. And it's now up to the coalition to prove that. And the coalition campaign has been running a risk-averse campaign. And I'm arguing that they need to actually take risks and, lead on the front foot and lead the charge and say, no, we will deliver meaningful tax reform. And here's what it looks like. And here's who's going to benefit. My argument and John's argument is that you should focus on families, not just for the electoral win, but because it's actually good for the country. And I'm
just to put a caveat on that. I mean, I'm going to give them like 10 options, and I imagine what you'll do is you'll put the family tax cut policy on the front page, and you'll put all the ones down the bottom and say, "Don't worry about the other page, just read the top one." But I mean, I'll put up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to give them what I think that they'll most likely go for, and it's the family tax cuts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think getting rid of the 16% tax bracket would be a vote winner as well. I mean, I think they should do both, and I think they could do both. But that's why I'm trying to frame each one of them as within the Overton window and give them a list, a smorgasbord. Take any of them. As long as you take something, just do something. Just cut tax somehow. And I try to give them as many options as possible so they can at least find one that they might think fits inside their political machinations. But the family tax cuts might be it. It's one of the first ones we put out there. So so that's a great opportunity to say, by the way, if you like any of this stuff, go to taxpayers.org.au. You can check out some of these suggestions on that website. You can see our campaigns running there. We've been, if you're keen to get the Liberals to actually grow a backbone and do a good tax cut, if they're on the edge, if they're thinking about it and the percentages are going up, check back with Brian every Monday and Thursday. We'll see the running calculator. Hopefully that keeps going. Brian, even if it's going down, just tell us it keeps going up. It'll get people excited. No, tell us the truth.
I'll be like that right general in front of the tanks. Peter Dutton will be out doing a press conference saying we're not cutting taxes, and I'll be going, no, everything's fine.
It's definitely happening now. I mean, so this is the opportunity to now for the people listening at home to start pressuring your Liberal MP, your Liberal candidate, start telling them this is exactly what we need to be seeing, right? I mean, we need to see some sort of tax cut, maybe a family tax cut if that's the one that they're most considering, but something. And it doesn't have to blow the budget. They can do these things smart, but they're losing momentum, and maybe this is the right time to lean on your Liberal Party friends and write a letter or go in and call up. I mean, Brian, I think you said this before. It's very boomer and it's very weird, but apparently calling the office, they notice that because if someone puts in that amount of effort, then that means they're quite invested. So please help us lift the pressure. And the other way you can help lift the pressure on this is donating or becoming a member, because we do use that to go around and put these documents under the noses of politicians. Some are polite and nod and smile and just wait for us to leave. Some actually pay attention. Sometimes we can push the needle, and we can only do it because you guys are sitting at home pitching in and helping us. Some people have already pitched into our campaign to try and push these family tax cuts. If you prefer to push other tax cuts, then they will have other campaigns to do that as well. Or you can ideally become a member, which you can do quite cheap. It's just a pretty couple of bucks a month, regular payment, helps us keep the lights on, helps us keep doing all of this. Because while we have food on the table, we will continue trying to put this stuff in front of politicians. But you can help us have that bread on the table and help us to be slightly more effective if you can pitch in on. And I should have put the banner up for that as well on taxpayers.org.au. We're up to an hour and a half, and we didn't get to half the stuff I was going to talk about. I did have next up was house prices, which we accidentally stumbled into halfway through when we were talking about Clive's ridiculous policies. Anyway, so and that was also, I think, functionally the topic.
Because, I like Ralph. Ralph's a good guy, and does a lot of the right things. But this trumpets thing is just mental to me.
Oh, here we go. Wait a second. See, this is a great advert for everyone at home. Premium member, it makes you taller and better looking, except for Brian. I know you should have seen what he looked like before he became an ATA member. So that's
yeah, that's true.
That's true. Joining ATA is what allowed Brian to grow the beard. So that is
that's true.
So if you join as well, you too.
Testosterone. That's our next policy.
That's not a great pitch to get the women to join, though, necessarily. So let's.
That's true.
But yeah, I think the house pricing conversation was also basically the topic of your argument with your former employer that we got into last session, which we don't need to go back into now. And I think the takeaway from that, as we discussed earlier, firstly, I do think there's a lot that could be done on the planning front, but immigration cuts just seems like such an obvious one. It seems like one that the Liberals should be able to win politically on. They should be able to do, but maybe it requires a bit more bravery than they have at the moment. But that just means we need to up the pressure so that we change their political calculus. And even if they're not brave, they accidentally do the right thing because we pressure them.
Yeah, exactly.
But
right, they respond to incentives, and so if you're pressuring them to adopt certain positions, the likelihood of that happening increases.
Now, the last one I had written in here, which we'll do very quickly because it's an hour and a half. I mean, I enjoy this as I try to keep them short so that some people in the future will actually press the replay button. But I could keep going. Brian probably needs his beauty sleep. But the last topic, and it'll be relatively short, tariffs, which got a bit fun and funky recently because Trump has decided to go on a tariffing spree. And I noticed one of the consequences of that was our good friend Topher Field put out a post running through his list of taxes he likes and didn't like. And he actually included tariffs as his second favorite or second least unfavorite, because he did preface it by saying he hates all taxes. And he doesn't really want any of them to be there. But clearly Trump is enjoying his tariffing escapade, and he might be taking some people with him, potentially including my co-host on this podcast. So what's your take on all this, Brian?
I mean, there's a lot of hyperventilating about it. I'm not that concerned. I think that he's doing it in order to try and realign Western interests, or specifically American interests, and realign certain Western governments to come to the table on things that he wants. And to some extent, it's working, right? So he has had Mexico come to the table when it comes to protecting the southern border. Now, yes, people say that Mexico was already committing troops to protect the southern border under the Biden administration. The key difference, though, is that the Mexicans made that commitment and then just didn't do it. But now they are actually doing it because the threat is that he will just jack up tariffs. He's got Canada to agree to a whole raft of things as well. And then when it comes to sort of the divide and conquer strategy, and this is getting into the geopolitical war stuff, and there's a great YouTuber called The New Atlas who's got a great video about it, which I will send at some point. What the Trump administration is trying to do is they're trying to commit EU nations to have peacekeeping troops in Ukraine to try and keep Russia in bay and carve out a peace deal, so that America and Europe can rebuild their own militaries and have some kind of bulwark against the growing sort of BRICS China multipolar world. Now, he's using the threats of tariffs to try and incentivize countries to do that. He did it with the UK. The UK is bending the knee on a whole raft of issues, and he's also putting some tariffs on us, and I suspect that that's probably to try and affect a change in government. Whether it plays out, I don't know, because some people obviously have a reaction to whatever Donald Trump does. But in terms of as a tax, yeah, sure, it's a bad tax, but I actually, it's not as bad as income tax. And he's allegedly saying that in exchange for tariffs, he'll reduce income taxes. Well, on the balance of, all taxes are bad, but some taxes are less bad than others, I'd be fine with tariffs if it meant that income taxes dropped. It's a big if, but if it did, just like everyone was fine with the concept of GST if it then resulted in a reduction in income tax. It didn't, because they lied to us, but we're just ignoring whether or not we're being lied to. I would take a tariff over an income tax any day of the week.
The problem with the GST income tax swap, and it would be the same with the tariff income tax swap to some degree, is that until we index tax brackets, until we fix the bracket creep problem, what happens is you have the GST goes up, income tax goes down, but then bracket creep means the income tax just goes back up. And so you end up just with the tax increase, but not the tax cut. So that's one concern. I actually think Trump kind of likes, so I hope the strategic stuff's true. And if the strategic stuff works out, if he's playing game theory, then good luck to him. I hope that works. My fear is that he actually does.
I think that there will be some negative outcomes, but for instance, you see Claire Lehman out there hyperventilating every second tweet about Trump being mean to Ukraine and being mean to Europe with tariffs and whatnot. But the end result is that he's getting what he wants, right? Like Germany is rebuilding their military. France is rebuilding its military. The UK is rebuilding its military. And this is what Trump has
And
been
nothing
asking for
bad
since
ever
2016.
happens when nothing bad ever happens when the Germans
Sure.
rebuild their military.
But, he's saying, I want you to do X. And then in order to try and own evil Cheeto Hitler and make him look bad, they're doing the thing that he wants, right? Like he's saying, I want you to rebuild your militaries. And they're saying, how dare you be so mean to us? Because you're being mean to us, we're going to rebuild our militaries and become more self-sufficient.
No, but my point is, anyway, I take your argument on the strategic,
because she's just encouraging people to do what Trump wants.
Like I take your, that geopolitics and that strategic part. I think that's part of the puzzle, but I think part of the puzzle is you might actually like tariffs. So I think unpacking that side of things, I got in trouble for this. I get in trouble on both sides. And Topher made a point similar to yours here. You can see his list of his preference for taxes. I mean, he did, let's just make sure people see this. He did say all taxes are bad, but they're not equally bad. So, what's the order? What's less bad? So he's not arguing for these taxes, but he's making this case, and it's similar to your case, saying, look, tariffs might be bad, but income taxes are terrible. And property taxes and GST aren't great either. And so that kind of argues for a rearrangement. There is some sense in that, but I want to put this out there. I'll get in trouble on both sides, but it's putting up tariffs a little bit now in exchange for lower income tax does make sense. But part of the reason is that taxes get exponentially worse as they go up. So a 10% income tax, I prefer zero, but really the evidence we've got, a 10% income tax doesn't actually harm the economy hugely. I kind of wish it did, because it would make my argument for zero taxes much stronger. But relatively low taxes have a relatively small impact. But if you double that income tax, it doesn't double the economic cost. It doesn't double the disincentive effect. It doesn't double the harm. It triples the harm or quadruples the harm. So as the income tax goes from 10 to 20 to 30, the cost is going up quite a lot until you get to the point where the income tax is above 40%. They basically only exist so that politicians can prove how much they hate rich people. Right? They don't actually raise you more money. They just
that's when you
punish.
And you actually potentially earn less. Yep.
Yeah, so that's they basically just exist there to punish you. Between about 40 and 60%, they're not really raising you money. They're just hurting people for the sake of hurting people. So our income taxes are way too high. And if you could cut them and keep them down by indexing the tax brackets and have put on import tariffs at 5, 10% or whatever, that could make some sense. But the same logic applies to tariffs. Tariffs of 5 or 10%, it's not the end of the world. I mean, some people are saying, we've got all these taxes in Australia. What we need to do is cut our 5% tariffs. We've got some 2% and 5% tariffs. Sure, theoretically, that might be a good move. But a 5% tariff is a pretty low tariff. By far, the 45% or as we saw before, 680% tax rates, those are causing far more damage. And we seem to have this weird myopia where people think tax reform is one discussion and international trade is another one. The international trade discussion is just the discussion of a tax. It's not a magical tax. It's not some sort of different sort of tax. It's a tax. You put a small tax on, it's a little bit of a problem, but you can live with it. You put a big tax on, it really screws you up. So a small tariff isn't that big a problem. If we had a small tariff for an income tax cut, great. The thing we have to keep in mind, that doesn't mean small tariff good, therefore, doubling it is twice as good. I mean, as that tariff gets up, it really starts to screw up your economy. So people have to realize just because there's scope for some amount of tariff play, that doesn't mean there's carte blanche. You can really ruin an economy if the tariffs are too high.
No, I agree with that. I think, I guess the reason why I was touching on the geopolitical stuff is that, America is the empire of the current year at this stage, and they're trying to combat against creation of a multipolar world at the moment. And tariffs are the first stage of that. The worst outcome is that all of that devolves into a kinetic war, which we don't want. But I guess when you're looking through that risk profile, it's like, look, we will put really stringent tariffs to try and realign Western interests to what we need. And if we have to use really very high tariffs to achieve that outcome, so be it. Because the other prospect is that we have to go and fight.
No, I don't disagree with that. There's a geopolitical element which has a entirely different set of calculus, and I don't disagree with you there. But I do think some part of the Trump argument coming out of his administration, that there is seeping through some of the economic argument for tariffs as well, which there might be some on a tax swap, as you mentioned before. But to the degree that people are just starting to say, as TOFA slips into here, that tariffs are good because they'll bring back your manufacturing. Firstly, they really probably won't. Most manufacturing has disappeared because of technology, not because of international trade. So unless we're going to also wind back technology, you're going to struggle. But also another thing people have to remember is that my last little boffiny thing on trade before I'll just let it go is if you have a trade policy that decreases imports, it'll also decrease exports. So you have to be aware that an anti-trade policy hurts your export industry and does it quite directly. Right? I mean, the inflow and outflow are quite closely linked. So if you're restricting the inflow, you are restricting the outflow. There's no get out of jail free card there. So it's
No, I agree. That's why my argument is that tariffs are not good, but they're less bad than some of the other options. Just on Topher's point there, I actually do strongly disagree with him on one thing. Like, I'm playing down the middle of the road here, right, which means I'll get run over by both sides. But yes, it boosts industry, some industries, not all. Yes, it boosts industries, but it also incentivizes those industries to suck. And the most famous example is Harley-Davidson. Harley-Davidson was dying in the ass through the 70s because Japanese motorcycle manufacturers were building better bikes that looked better, ran better, and were reliable. Harley-Davidson sales started dropping. So it was actually Ronald Reagan who put tariffs on Japanese motorcycle manufacturers and also put restrictions on the types of Japanese motorcycles that could come into America. That saved Harley. Harley-Davidson was able to exist and continue manufacturing in America and, rebuild. But for a solid 15, almost 20 years, their motorcycles sucked because they had no incentive to make better motorcycles because there wasn't proper competition in their country. So,
which is why if you just had the 10% tariff, you'd have the Japanese bikes coming in at slightly higher. You're slightly helping Harley-Davidson, but there is still that competitive pressure. They don't just get an infinite get out of jail free card. They just get a slight little push along.
That's correct.
But I mean, the idea that it brings back manufacturing or brings back industry, it brings back import competing industry and it shrinks your export industry. They're both factories full of workers needing jobs, right? So it doesn't. There's a bit of a one-sided thing where people think you can decrease imports without it decreasing exports. They are very closely correlated. There's no magic in this. So you can make that decision. You want to have fewer imports and fewer exports. Don't really pretend you get an extra job out of it. You just lose one job and create another. So, or potentially lose two jobs.
To recap, just to really confuse our viewers, all taxes bad, tariffs less bad of some of the taxes. Tariffs also really bad if tariffs too high. Tariffs do protect industry, but don't protect others. And when they do protect industry, they can sometimes incentivize really poor workmanship.
I think it's clear here, Brian, that you should write an economics textbook. I think that's how it could be put together. So that's beautifully worded. Anyway, I think this is the longest session we've had here. We've got up to 550 people still watching us now. It's and I appreciate everyone watching along. But just as for those people who've just tuned in, we're just about to abandon you. Sorry, Brian needs his beauty sleep. He needs to go back and grow back his beard. So, did you have anything else you had?
Chin that I built up over the dad years. That's
or just hide it with the beard. So that's
Nah, screw that. I'm gonna not have the beard, and I'll just every time I look in the mirror, I'll go, damn, I need to lose weight again.
Yeah, it's good incentive. Like anything else, politics or policy you wanted to say before we come back?
Look, I keep talking about this. I know it sounds like very low level, but low level stuff works. I remember having a conversation with Erica Betts about this a few years ago, and he said to me, when we get email campaigns about an issue, most of the times we ignore it because, we get email campaigns from issues all the time. But when a constituent rocks up at the electorate office, or when a constituent takes the time to call our office and ask to speak to me or speak to one of my staff members and say, hey, look, I really care about, in this instance, family tax cuts and giving money back to Australian, families, they pay attention to that. Because it means that one of their constituents cares so much about the issue that they took time out of their day to call a complete stranger and talk to them about it. So, yes, it is very boomer politics. Most politicians are boomers. Get on the phone, tell them what you want them to do.
And of course, the second best thing you can do is go into taxpayers.org.au, have a look around the website. And if you like it, and even if you don't like it, you should just become a member. Top right, you'll see a little membership button. Click that. A couple of bucks or more per month keeps things ticking over. So with that said, we do this every Monday and Thursday at 8:30 Sydney time. We talk about the politics of the day and new policy issues. We are frustrated by the politics having a lack of policy, so we're trying to add some more of that policy discussion each time. We're putting out a series of tax cut suggestions and look, just tax productivity suggestions that the government can hopefully pick up on. Today's one, I guess the takeaway from that, mostly I was just showing that EMTR graph, that insane graph that we looked at earlier. But the easy policy suggestion that comes out of that, if anyone actually ever cared to fix it, is taper those welfare, get rid of those spikes, taper each one of those welfares. And that's, you're probably not going to pick up a lot of extra votes because a lot of people won't understand it, but you'll have done a good thing. So, and the people who do understand it will appreciate you'll be speaking up to them. So that's policy suggestion. We'll have another one coming up this Thursday and plenty more in the weeks coming up because we've got less than 2 months before the federal election. And if the government and opposition aren't going to talk good tax policy, then we'll do it for them. And I hope you can join us then every Monday and Thursday at 8:30. With that said, thank you all.
See you guys.